In a matter of weeks, the global order has been upturned. The security guarantees and alliances that have dominated the post-war era have been torn apart by a White House that seems to respect authoritarian Russia more than its democratic allies. What does this mean for Europe, the UK, and what we loosely call the West? With us, we have the Financial Times' former chief political commentator, Philip Stevens. Hello and welcome, Philip.
Hello, good evening. Great to be here.
Great to have you with us. Can we just summarise what's happened in the last 4 weeks, well, even one? It is deeply shocking.
What's happened is that you have a US president who has basically said, my commitment, or that my country's commitment to a post-war order which guaranteed the borders of Europe against aggression has gone, that I think that Vladimir Putin, a Russian dictator who invaded Ukraine 3 years ago, has a good case in seeking peace, but presumably peace on his terms. And he said that basically, not quite in terms yet, but nearly, we pretty much had enough of NATO and buying security for all you Europeans.
Some Americans would say that Europe has been freeloading, as he just indicated now, for years, and we should have seen it coming.
I think so. Look, I mean, I think everyone, or most people on this call, we're familiar with the sort of the dialogue in Ernest Hemingway's first book when one of the characters says, to another, how did you go bankrupt? And the reply is, well, slowly at first and then suddenly. And that's a really good metaphor for what's happening to the international order and actually Western cohesion at the moment. I think the big change is in the American perception of what they get out of the system. And you had a period for 60 years or so after the Second World War when the US could look at the world and say, what's our foreign policy? Our foreign policy is obviously, first and foremost, the pursuit of our national interest. But we can best pursue our national interest by building an international system which embeds our values, open markets, freedom, democracy in that system.
But what I have difficulty with is the perpetual sense that the idea that this is complete, that the idea that there's no going back. We are so bound together. Whether we look at the way our military forces are structured, the way trade, if you're a Brit, this goes sort of hand in hand if you think about the military as well. After this, Trump's president for the next 4 years? Okay, maybe JD Vance is in next time. Who knows? But are you saying there's no going back?
I'm saying there's no going back to the days of, if you like, the 1980s, the 1990s, and perhaps the noughties. I think, the relationship, I think, has fundamentally changed. It's changed partly because of the American views of the world have changed, partly because of American politics, but partly because we live in a much more contested world in which China increasingly is opposing. I mean, many people have predicted the fall of the sort of post-war order. We all thought that China would be the instigator. The odd thing, the curious thing in this is that the sort of blow, that this blow has been struck by the United States rather than China. This isn't all going to be to break up in a day or two, but I think the direction of travel is clear. It's going to be a more distant. I talked to someone at NATO in Brussels at the weekend who said, we've been talking for the last 2 or 3 years about de-risking our relationship with China. That means not decoupling from China, but taking the risks. The conversation in the next few years is going to be about de-risking our relationship with the United States.
Okay, I mean, let's start dealing with some of those questions then. And here we are sitting in Europe. We've talked about Five Eyes. In Britain, we buy our nuclear missiles from the United States. I mean, what do we do next? There are a whole series of things, if you're talking about decoupling with the United States, that we have to look at. We'll talk about Russia and Ukraine and what might happen in the next few years. or even months if we know that there's no American guarantee? There are huge questions there. And then more broadly, surely life for you and me becomes more expensive and more insecure.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think at the moment, I think the old order is dead, but we don't know the shape of the new order. We're in a sort of no man's land, if you like, between the two. But I think the things you can say about the new order is that they will be unpredictable, much more fluid in terms of shifts in power, much more transactional, much more to do with, as Trump would putting it, doing the deal rather than promoting shared values or shared interests over time. And yeah, I think probably more expensive. Yeah, because we're going to have to spend a lot of money on defense.
Let's just deal with the short term and look at Ukraine now. The United States, the White House has Kremlin talking points. If Zelensky is not willing to sign a deal, and US support for Ukraine disappears, what happens next?
Well, I don't think the withdrawal of US support would persuade the Ukrainians, if you like, to put their hands up. I think a lot of the weapons now supplied by the US can be supplied by Europe, not in the same quantities yet, but production is ramping up. Domestic munitions manufacturing in Ukraine, I'm told, is going up very rapidly indeed. So Ukraine would be able to fight the war. It would be a lot more costly in civilian lives. They may lose more territory. It would probably a lot more urban in places. Europeans won't put boots on the ground unless there is American, essentially, air cover. When they talk about, when politicians in Europe talk about an American backstop, what they really mean is American air cover. Without that, they won't put boots on the ground, but they will ramp up financial and military aid. So I think what one would see in the next year would be a much more brutal war, which Ukraine would be losing slowly.